Thanks for stopping by to check out yet another episode of Vintage Audio Review. In this episode, I'm going to talk about something that actually isn't vintage, but would be very useful if you owned a vintage receiver, integrated amplifier, or preamplifier that did not have a remote controlled volume control on it. And that would be this MCM custom IR remote volume control. This little guy right here. I will show a closer up view in just a little bit. The backstory on this was I was talking to my good buddy Ian, and he asked if I had seen the Skylabs Audio, which is a great vintage YouTube channel, where they discussed a remote controlled volume control, this little guy right here. And he said he was going to order one. They are not very expensive, less than $50, and would I be interested in testing it for him? And I said, sure, I would just love to test one of these guys. I have had some experience with some things that were inexpensive, designed for audio, that just did not test very good, and I ended up returning them. And that particular item was the Duac Little Bear speaker amplifier switcher, and I'll show a little picture of that here, and just the frequency response is why I returned it. And I got a second one and it had the same problem, and actually even a third time, and all three times they had the same bass boost. Anyway, I digress. So Ian got this guy and it came rather quickly, and I tested it, and I'm gonna share my experiences with it as well as show you the data that I measured. First, let's take a closer look at this little volume control. So this is what you get when you open up the box, and on the left you obviously have the IR remote volume control box itself. Next to it is the controller, and it has a mute button and then a volume up and down. You have a nice little multi-language manual with it, and you have the ubicatory wall wart. So that is what all comes inside it. This obviously is the rear part of the IR remote volume control, and it's pretty simple: input and output, and then it has your 12 volt DC wall wart input on the far right. So I have now plugged it in, and you can see that the power light is always on, and it will start flickering when I do volume up. So right now I'm going to do volume up. I'm pressing it once I'm pressing the volume up, and I guess I just hit my max there. It's not changing, so that is the maximum volume or the least attenuation. If I hit the mute button, the mute LED comes on. That's nice. And if I go volume down, so right now I'm hitting the volume down, and I'm just holding it down, and there it stopped. See how it stopped flashing? It has reached its maximum there. And now I'm going to start going up. I'm holding it down, and there it hit its maximum. So there we go. That is kind of the basic operation on this guy. I suppose the LED could be on the bright side of things. That could bother some people, but that would be the only negative thing that somebody might have with this unit. As far as the IR distance, I would say I didn't really test it, but it would be at least 10 feet range. So it's probably more than that, but I only went about 10 feet away. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Based on the measurements that I took on this little guy, the best place to connect it would be in your tape monitor loop. The main reason for that is it's fairly easy to do, and you really don't have to worry about overdriving it. This guy gets overdriven at about 2.2 volts RMS. So if you have a preamp output, those can usually vary up to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 volts. You don't want to overdrive this more than about 2 volts. So if you do want to connect it to your preamp output, then I would put in about a half a millivolt signal into my aux input, say at 1 kilohertz, and I would measure what's coming out at the preamp output. Most of those main in preamp outs have little U-shaped jumpers, and you could just connect a multimeter there that can measure RMS at 1 kilohertz, and I would set my volume control so that with half a millivolt coming in, I was not getting more than about, say, 2 volts coming out, 2 volts RMS at 1 kilohertz, and I wouldn't touch my volume control when I hook this up. So that would be how I would do it. If you hook it in the tape monitor loop, which you are probably not using, then that is real simple. You're not going to overload it because there's probably not more than about 500 millivolts or so in that circuit. So that would be the preferred way, in my opinion, on how to hook this up. Now, as far as what it does to your signal and the integrity and the purity, I mean, we're talking vintage stuff. So that being said, this did very little as far as it affecting the frequency response or affecting the amount of distortion, and it performed better than the little spec sheet that came with it in the instruction manual. It does really a good job of not really affecting anything majorly. And that is one of the reasons why I would have no hesitation in using this device. And you'll see the data that I took following the end of the video just will work out better that way for this particular video. Hopefully you will watch that and have a cup of coffee before you do. There's not a lot there, but I just kind of want to show you like the crosstalk and the normal stuff that I measure on something like this. Anyway, that being said, just in its operation, most likely you're going to have its wall wart plugged into a switched outlet on your preamplifier, integrated amplifier, or receiver, and when you power it off and you power it back on, this guy should remember the volume setting it was at least from the few minutes where I turned it off, waited a few minutes, turned it back on, it remembered the volume setting pretty much. So that is a good thing. Also, when you press your remote control and keep pressing it, if you're going volume up or volume down, whenever you hit the limit, the LED stops flashing. So that's how you know that you are at the limit of the minimum or the maximum of the volume. It would be nice if it had a little couple LEDs that kind of indicated where it's at, but it doesn't. Now, when you just press the volume up or down once and you see the LED come on for a second, that will be 1 dB of change. It's very consistent, down from no attenuation to 15 dB of attenuation. Each little click was 1 dB. If you hold it down longer, it'll go to the end faster. I didn't really measure how long it took, but you can just hit the mute button if you want to get there quickly, and that gives you about 80 dB of attenuation, which is about what you get if you keep holding the volume down control to the LED stops flashing. So it works really well. I hooked it up to a Marantz 2330 vintage receiver that I just happen to have lying around, which will be a future video coming up. And I tried it both ways, in the tape monitor loop or in the pre-out main-in loop, and it worked great either position. It's really a nice device. It doesn't really add anything really bad to the signal. It does increase the distortion a small amount. All in all, I mean, we're talking vintage gear, so it's going to be a great addition to your system. And I'm really glad that Ian purchased one, so he was the guinea pig, so I could test it for him. And thanks to Skylab's Audio for bringing it to our attention. Once again, at the end of my little sign out here, there will be measurements, and I thank you again for watching. If you have any comments, please leave them below. I'd like to hear them. And I will leave a link to this in the description below as well. Also, if you have not subscribed to the channel, it would be nice if you did. And if you liked the video, that would be nice as well. And until next time, have a great day or night. This first piece of data is a reference showing the SNR THD of the system that I am using, which is the QA402 analyzer, and this is basically with the input cable connected to the output cable, and it just shows what the very best case of the THD SNR would be of the system. So now I have the IR remote control volume hooked up, and it is set for no attenuation or maximum volume. The signal is the same that I used in the reference plot prior to this, and that would be with 2 volts going in or 6 dBV. And you can see it basically has pretty much no change in gain going through it. The distortion, depending on the channel, we'll say it's less than 0.09%. And the SNR is 99 dB. However, the THD plus noise is much higher than the pass-through, but overall it is still not bad. It's 60 dB versus about 100 dB, so there's about 40 dB difference, and that is mainly due to the level of the second, third, fourth, fifth harmonics that you see to the right of the center 1 kilohertz signal. And here we have the frequency response from 20 Hertz to 20 kilohertz of the IR remote volume control. And even though it may look kind of ugly, that is basically plus or minus 0.1 dB, which is minuscule. So there really isn't any change to the frequency response by adding in the volume control. And this, once again, is with a 0 dB attenuation from the volume control, or it at a max volume setting with 2 volts RMS in. Here I have adjusted the IR remote volume control such that I have 10 dB of attenuation, and you can see the THD is still looking pretty good, less than, we'll say, 0.08%. The SNR has decreased, which is what you would expect because you have 10 dB of attenuation, and the THD plus noise has stayed about the same. This is a plot made with a 1 kilohertz input signal at 6 dBV or 2 volts RMS. And what I have done is continue to hold down the volume control until it reached the maximum attenuation or minimum volume. And you can see that is about 78 dB of attenuation. In this plot, I have a 6 dBV 1 kilohertz signal applied with the IR remote volume control set for 0 dB of attenuation or maximum volume. And I just press the mute button. And this does have a different effect than what I mentioned earlier in the video, in that when you hit the mute button, you get about another 13 dB of attenuation. Not that you really need it, but it does affect the signal with greater attenuation. Here is the multi-tone response for the IR remote volume control, and this would be for the case with 0 dB attenuation for the volume control, and it is demonstrating about 15 bits of distortion-free range, which is pretty good. Here's the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz with our IR remote volume control set for 0 dB attenuation or maximum volume. We can see that with a 6.8 dBV input, which would be about 2.2 volts, we are into heavy distortion, heavy being 3.7%, let's call it, and our THD plus noise has gotten to be about maybe minus 29 dB. I should point out that the specifications for this unit state that it has a maximum input signal level of 1.65 volts, so we're definitely exceeding that here. And also it says the SNR should be greater than 90 dB and the THD should be a maximum of 0.2%. So as long as we keep that voltage less than about 2 volts from what we have seen in previous data, we easily meet those requirements. This plot shows the THD versus frequency for various input signal levels to the IR remote volume control, and this would be with it set for a maximum volume level or minimum attenuation. You can see that as our input signal level increases to around plus 6 dBV, which would be the very top there, we're still less than 0.1%. The specification was that it would be less than 0.2% at a lower input signal level, so it is really performing pretty good as long as you stay below around 6 dBV. If you get less than 3 dBV, your distortion drops down really low to probably about 0.05%. This plot shows the crosstalk between the left and right channels. In this case, the right channel was terminated into a short and the signal applied to the left channel. Now the signal was at 1.65 volts RMS, or 4.65 dBV, and you can see that it has really good isolation between the channels. The isolation ranges anywhere from about greater than 70 dB to, I would say, about 90 dB at the high end of the band, and it's better than 100 dB from maybe 100 hertz to maybe 2 kilohertz or so. So the isolation between the channels is very good. I wanted to make a little addendum to this video, and that was after my buddy Dan came over with his Sonoran 12-inch subwoofer that he put together himself. And while we were using it, Dan would have to get up and adjust the levels because there is no variable subwoofer output on my Carver CT7 preamplifier. We hooked up the subwoofer to the tape monitor output, and that works fine, except you do have to adjust the levels. If you had the IR remote control volume controller, you could hook that up in between your tape monitor output and the subwoofer line level input, and that would allow you to control the volume of the subwoofer. You would just turn up the volume on the subwoofer appropriately to work with the level coming out of your tape monitor output jacks, and it would make things a lot easier if you had a subwoofer in a vintage system. Now, if you also wanted to use the IR remote controller in your tape monitor loop to control the volume of the system, that's probably not going to work very well because I did not see any way to adjust the remote control settings on the volume control if you had more than one of them. I think it's just one code that's on there and you're stuck with that. So you could either control the volume of the subwoofer or you could control the volume of your receiver, preamp, or amplifier, but probably not both of them. Once again, thanks for watching.